Hello, everyone, and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit's 70th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Brenda Brook, and I'm the co-chair of the Book Fair Steering Committee. And it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to How Magicians Think with Joshua J. We're celebrating 70 years at the Detroit Jewish Book Fair with an entire year of book and story programming. So join us as we honor the world's first Jewish book fair, highlighting diverse authors, curating new Jewish writing, and promoting the global art of Jewish storytelling. To see our full schedule and watch events you may have missed and find our online store where you can buy How Magicians Think, visit our website at culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. And if you enjoy this event and other book fair events, consider becoming a patron or donating to Book Fair. And you can do either of these or both at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. Remember, we rely on community support to make this annual event possible. So I thank you in advance for becoming part of our family. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to the whole Book Fair Committee. Their dedication, innovation, commitment, and hard work have made all of this possible. We have a really exciting event for you this evening, and we want you to be a part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comment section below or by texting to the number in the corner of your screen. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they'll take as many of your questions as they can. And while you're here at our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way, you'll never miss any of our exciting events. The focus of tonight's event is How Magicians Think, Misdirection, Deception, and Why Magic Matters. And we have with us the author of the book, Joshua J. And introducing will be the Detroit Jewish Community Center's new Senior Director for Cultural Arts, Stephen Kantrowitz, who will moderate the discussion. In How Magicians Think, professional magician and best-selling author Joshua J. not only opens the door, he brings us inside and turns on the light, revealing the artistry, inside history, and fascinating traditions of a subject long shrouded in mystery. Written as a series of short, lively essays, How Magicians Think describes the making of illusions, the psychology behind them, and the characters who create them. But above all, he reveals the mindset behind the magic and what it's like to practice an art that so many love, yet so few understand. Joshua has performed on stages in over 100 countries. He has fooled Penn and Teller on their hit show Fool Us. He holds a Guinness World Record in card magic. He has performed magic on numerous television shows and designed illusions for stage and screen, including a collaboration with HBO for Game of Thrones. Joshua consulted with the United States Postal Service on the design of their postage stamp series, Magic. Joshua was awarded Magician of the Year in 2020 by the Society of American Magicians Parent Assembly for his contribution to the art of magic. Stephen Kantrowitz is the new Senior Director for Cultural Arts at our JCC. He comes to us from Florida, where he was most recently Director of Cultural Affairs, City of Miramar. He and his wife Jody also run the National Jewish Theater Broadway a la carte, where he has programmed, produced, and administered more than 250 performances, festivals, and gala fundraising events across the country. Please join me in warmly welcoming Joshua J. and Stephen Kantrowitz.
Hey, Joshua, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thanks for that beautiful introduction. I'm just grateful to be with all of you in Detroit, a city that I was telling our moderators beforehand, a city that I love to visit. So welcome to all.
We're so happy to have you here. So, Josh, you grew up in Canton, Ohio, and you were raised Jewish. I understand you first became interested in magic when your father showed you a card trick, but didn't explain how it was done. So were any of your brothers or sisters also interested in magic? And did anyone really inspire you to become the magician that you are today?
So the question actually has an unusual answer. I'm an only child, which probably has something to do with why I like magic so much, because it's something you can do by yourself endlessly for hours. So I don't have any siblings to answer your question. I was raised in Canton, Ohio, and my dad was a dentist by trade, and he got into magic so he could calm patients down before he would do procedures. He showed me a trick at 7 years old, and it was a card trick, totally melted my brain. I just, I hear people that have interests in other things, be it art or baseball, that first shot they took or the first time they played chess, and something just clicks. And I can absolutely relate to that because I saw this card trick, and even though it fooled me, it made sense. It meant something to me. So I went into my room and I made charts. I was 7 years old. I made charts and I had decks and I made piles. And 2 hours later, I went back into the family room and I said, okay, Dad, now I'm going to show the same trick to you. And I did that trick back to him. And when he saw that I had figured out this trick, it's a famous trick called Out of This World, largely considered the greatest card trick of the first half of the 20th century. He sort of said, wow, you figured that out. We got to start doing this together. And that's what we did. And it's the only thing I've ever done.
That's a great story. Wonderful you were able to share that and learn from your father and become who you are because of that first start. Who has inspired you? Other magicians, other people in your life, another mentor?
So, yeah, coupled on what I just said, growing up in Canton, Ohio, at the time, I saw as a huge disadvantage because I would see at these conferences and competitions, I would see kids that grew up in LA, they got to go to the Magic Castle and take lessons from really famous magicians. And the magicians from New York City, where I live now, would all help the young magicians in special clubs and design their acts for them and give them things to say. And in Canton, Ohio, we didn't have anybody like that. I didn't have a magic teacher. I had to figure things out for myself. But I'll tell you this, that disadvantage, looking back in retrospect, ended up being the best advantage I could have hoped for. Because where they had everything handed to them, where they became magicians in the tradition of their teachers, I had to carve my own path. I had to truly sit around dreaming up the tricks I wanted to do and come up with these, at the time, terrible methods to complete those illusions. But I learned slowly how to design magic. And I didn't have that advantage of a teacher. I just had to figure it out myself. And looking back, that was the greatest education informally that I could have asked for. So you ask about heroes. None of the magicians that I love most are people anybody in this Zoom chat would have heard of. They're not the people you're expecting: Houdini, David Copperfield, David Blaine. They're magicians that you haven't heard of. And one of the great pleasures of my book is shining a light on some of these quirky, unusual characters you've never heard of, but you have to see. People like Jan Frisch from France, who does a very unusual act in which the magic happens despite him trying to stop it. Or Juan Tamariz, largely considered the greatest magician alive today, famous in Spain, but unknown here. He's a great influence. Guy Hollingworth, the smoothest, elegant British magician, not even a professional. He's a barrister by trade. So I have lots of influences, but they aren't people that you would expect or would have heard of.
Great. So tell me, Josh, has your Jewish heritage influenced or shaped you as a performer or as a writer now?
I'm sorry, one more time. You said
your Jewish background, your Jewish heritage, has that influenced you or shaped you as a performer or writer?
What I can say about that is that I am grateful that in my family, the arts were valued. In other words, my father, I told you, became a dentist. He became a dentist because in his family, that was one of the few choices of what he could be, right? If he wanted to show his face at home, he had to be an accountant, a lawyer, a dentist, or a doctor, right? And you find that that's a very common thing in a lot of families. But for me, it was very much a question of do what you love and find a way to make a living. And I'm really grateful that I grew up with a mom and a dad who made that possible and had that open mind. When you talk about a Jewish identity, what I can say to you is my observation is that Jewish traditions value magic in a way that a lot of other traditions and values are not prioritized. So one of the unanswered and unanswerable questions in magic that I think maybe the viewers of this chat will find fascinating is this. Jews make up, less than a third of a percentage point of the population here. And if you made a list, and there have been lists of the most influential 100 magicians of the last century, then there was the most influential magicians of all time, a little more than a third, 36%, of that list is Jewish. So how do you explain truly a little better than 1 in 3 great magicians being Jewish when we make such a small, infinitesimally small part of the population generally? And by the way, magicians know this to be true, but in case you're saying, can that really be true? I mean, let's just look at it for a second. The most famous magician in the world is David Copperfield. David Kotkin, Jewish. If he's challenged by anybody, it's probably David Blaine, half Jewish. If you look at the greatest coin, people you haven't heard of, but the greatest coin magician of all time, David Roth, Jewish. The greatest card magician who just passed away, Ricky Jay, born Ricky Potash, Jewish. If you look at the greatest mentalist alive today, it's Max Maven, born Phil Goldstein, Jewish. And on and on and on. All these little subgenres, whether it's origami magic or magic creators or magic authors, Richard Kaufman, Jewish. The greatest in every one of these subcategories tends to be somebody Jewish or, is very high on the list. So it's true. And the question of why that is, I've got a few answers for you. I don't know if this is at all interesting for your listeners, but what I can tell you is that one of the contributing factors is certainly that all of these people that I mentioned, when they talk about their backgrounds, often talk about how they lived in a place that prioritized, they lived in a family that prioritized magic and that valued entertainment.
So I guess it's in our DNA.
Yeah.
Tell us now that we've all read your book, how did you become interested in writing and lecturing? Are you an avid reader yourself? And what kind of books do you enjoy reading for pleasure?
Well, that's a good question. I got one right here on the table holding this laptop up. I just bought the book, what's it called? Lost Cities, Ancient Treasures. It's the new book by National Geographic. And it's got, your typical archaeology stuff in it, which I love to read endlessly. The truth is, I read anything that interests me outside of magic that might be able to help inside. The last book I finished, let me tell you the name because it was fantastic. Everybody should read this book if you like the kind of stuff I like, it's called The Feather Thief by Kirk Wallace Johnson. It's about the largest feather heist in history. Why is that interesting to a magician? Well, I think I found a trick that I can use a patter theme, which is magician speak for a script, about feathers and a heist of feathers. So, it's something that interests me. And, with magic, and this is the thing about my book. If you take nothing else from the book, what I hope you guys will take is that magic is the way I see the world. It's sort of the lens that I look at everything through. So even when I'm reading the Feather book, I'm thinking about how it's going to impact my work. And I know that the people reading this book are largely not magicians, but I also know that there are artists, there are people that find it fascinating, and that you're looking for inspiration. And it's always, I think, helpful to see how artists view the world and their tips and tricks. And that's in this book.
That's great. Really great. So when you are out on the lecture circuit as well, what do you normally talk about, since they're obviously lecturing and performing magic are related, but not quite the same?
Yeah. So, I'm very lucky to have a pretty diverse career. I know a lot of magicians that do the same 12-minute act, and they go all over the world, the stages all over, and the only thing they do is that 12-minute act or that 1-hour show, and they go from cruise ship to cruise ship, stage to stage, and that's all they do. That couldn't be more different than my existence. So I do shows, hour-long shows. I do close-up magic, so formal close-up for small, intimate groups, sort of exclusive events like that. I do lectures for the public, so I lecture on creativity. I lecture on the history of magic. I have a strange fascination called tragic magic. So I'm the leading researcher in the strange subgenre of all the magicians, spectators, and assistants who have been killed in the act of magic. So I do a presentation where I talk about beheadings, shootings, staged suicides, love triangles, accidental deaths. Lots of crazy, crazy things have happened in magic, things that you would think could only exist in the movies. And I lecture on that as well. And then when I lecture to other magicians, for example, Detroit, where you live, has a really robust magic community there. And I've lectured numerous times for that community, the one in Cleveland, all over the world. And I will lecture on my technique, original tricks that I do and that I've invented, and I'll lecture on those things.
Great. One of our viewers would like to know, can you tell us more about fooling Penn and Teller and that experience?
Sure. For those who don't know, there's a show. It's now in season 8. It's called Fool Us by Penn and Teller, 2 great Las Vegas magicians. And the concept of the show is that you go on competition style and you show a trick and you hope that you fool them. And if you fool them, you win the show, you win some money, and you get to close their Vegas show. And a few years ago on season 2, I did a trick and it fooled them, and I got to close the show, and my family was there, and it was really a wonderful experience. The trick that I did, and I would encourage everybody, maybe when this is over, if you like magic, to do a search of my name, Joshua J. Fool Us, and this trick will come up. And it has an interesting story behind it. In 30 seconds, basically, I live in New York, right across the street from the largest blind center here. So every day when I'm walking around, I see sightless people who are going to coffee shops and grabbing donuts and walking around, and several live in my building. And it occurred to me one day, as I shared an elevator with somebody in my building who couldn't see and had the walking stick, I thought, oh man, magic is something this person will never experience. It's like sunset or art. They'll just never see it for obvious reasons. But does it have to be that way? In other words, what would it be like if a blind person could experience a magic trick? Well, you would have to fool their mind instead of their eyes. It would have to be mind reading. And based on that question, I put together a card trick, which is one of my favorite things I've ever created. And I did it on stage where I was totally blindfolded and did this trick that had no visual quality. It was a mental quality trick. And it fooled them. So it was a great day.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Congratulations on your Guinness World Record.
Thank you.
And tell our viewers what record you hold and how you prepared for beating that record.
Yeah, so there was a record set in, I think, 1993 at the Magic Castle in Hollywood for card tricks. And the record is you have a number of selected cards made in a deck, shuffled by a judge, a Guinness neutral person. And then you have 1 minute to find as many selected cards as you can. You can do it any way you want, but it has to be a shuffled deck with the selections genuinely lost in the pack. And I thought I had a way to solve this problem and break this record. I think the record was 6. And I was in a boating accident 1 week before I was supposed to challenge the record on a stage in Los Angeles. I collided with a metal buoy at 55 miles an hour when I was water skiing on a lake in Ohio, northeastern Ohio, not far from you guys. So I spent over a month at the Cleveland Clinic. My hip, ribs, elbow, all injured, but I broke my arm, both bones in 2 places. I had 3 surgeries you probably can't see, but I have a scar going up my wrist at the Cleveland Clinic. I had a plate, 5 screws, and 2 pins put in my hand. And the surgeon at the 3rd and last surgery said, look, I think we're going to save your left hand, but I don't think you're going to ever use it again, because there was really bad nerve damage. But long story short, 9.5 years after it happened, right before the pandemic started, I set the new Guinness World Record for card tricks. And on stage every night when I do my show and when I've done book events for this tour, I close by recreating that world record.
Terrific. It's so great that you were able to come back from such a major injury. That's really remarkable.
Well, you know what's funny is, it's not funny actually, is when I was recuperating, of course, they under promise and try to over deliver. But the surgeon was, when we would ask the obvious questions like, will I get my feeling back? Will I be able to wiggle my fingers again? The answer is, we'll just have to see. We'll just have to see. But for months, I was in a cast, really unable, when they say touch your thumb to your pinky, this was as far as I could go. I have video where this is as far as I could go. And then many months later, slowly, I remember having to cheat it and say, look, I'm so close. If I go like this, oh, I can do it. But even at that moment, sort of at the worst possible moment, I never thought of giving up magic. Imagine not having your left hand to perform magic. I just was resigned to the fact that I would learn to do it one-handed. I was practicing sitting in bed with my morphine drip, learning to cut and shuffle a deck of cards with one hand. You know what I mean? That is what mattered to me more than anything, was just figuring that out.
And we're glad you were able to figure that out. Naomi Levine would like to know, in your opinion, why are there so few female magicians?
It's a great question. And let me check here in the book, because I want to point those of you who have it to the place. Yep, chapter 15, page 74 is a whole chapter on this exact topic. And Naomi, to answer your question in brief, you can see the longer answer in the book. Yeah, there's a woefully small amount of female magicians. And largely that's because magic was not a very welcoming place for centuries. When you think of the iconic classic magician, what do you think of? You think of a white male in top hat and tails. And those of us who care are trying desperately to change that image. And fortunately, I can say that there has been some success. I run a youth program every year at a convention that we do with about 60 young magicians, and a third of those are female. When we started giving scholarships, 0 female magicians, young female magicians, even applied. And now almost a third are female, which is great. And we have similar numbers at the Magic Castle youth program and some others as well. And part of that just comes from reframing things and trying to be better allies for women who want to start in magic. And the other thing that I talk about in How Magicians Think, which is, I think, really a pleasure to shine a light on, is there are really great magicians, female magicians in the world right now. And we just have to make sure we spread the word. For example, a really great magician was Alexander Herman. This is the guy you think of when you think of that tuxedo, top hat, and tails. He had the goatee. And he died unexpectedly quite young. And his wife and assistant was named Adelaide Herman. And rather than sort of fade into obscurity or do something else or just retire with her money, she decided to take over her husband's show and toured for over 30 years as a solo act. She's considered widely the first great American touring female magician. And fascinatingly, they discovered her memoirs being passed down privately in her family. And it was published very recently, like in 2004 or something like that. And they're available. And you get this firsthand account of what it was like to travel the world as a female magician. There's another magician I talk about named Ding Yang from China. And she does the craziest act. Imagine she's an acrobat and a magician. And at one point early in her act, she gets on her hands and manipulates with her feet. So her feet are in the air and she starts manipulating silks and all sorts of stuff with her feet and produces a bird from her feet. And it's a really bizarre and amazing act, and one I hope everybody gets to see. And the last magician I'll point out I've profiled all these people in the book, is Tina Leonard. She's a fantastic magician. I hesitate to say she's a fantastic female magician because she's just a great magician and we don't have to classify it in any strange way. But she has an act called Mop Man, which is one of the most iconic acts in all of stage magic. And she plays a janitor wheeling a cart on stage, and it's got an upside down mop in the cart. And that mop starts to come to life and becomes this mystery man. And so she's next to it. But through mime and puppeteering and magic and acting, she is acting as this mop man as well as herself, and does this beautiful act of productions and vanishes, and it's just something you have to see. So maybe you can look that up as well on YouTube.
Great. One of our listeners would like to know, where can we see or hear you talk about your book? And I'll add to that, where, either in person or is the best place to find you virtually to see you perform some of your magic.
Yeah, so I'm finishing up a book tour that has been 5 months now. So since September, I've been on a plane just about every other day. I have 3 dates coming up in New Jersey this month. This month it starts to wind down. And then I go to Jacksonville and Tampa and then Memphis. I'll be in New York City June 23rd at Lincoln Center. So if you find yourself in New York or want to make the trip, I think that the cost of entry at Lincoln Center is just the price of a book, and you then get a book with it. So I'll be doing my full show there. And those are the places. Had you asked me this question in September, I would have been able to say, oh, I was in Toledo and Cleveland and lots of places that would have been drivable to your viewers. I know at least one of our moderators goes to Florida periodically, and I'm sure a lot of you Detroit people are like us Ohio people and go there. I'm performing in Florida pretty regularly and touring. Best place to keep up with me is on Instagram. You can find me there, and I post tour dates all the time.
Great. A lot of people like to follow you. We have another text question from Beth. She wanted to know, what is your favorite trick that you've seen another magician perform, and what is your own favorite trick to perform?
Thanks, Beth. That's an interesting question. So for me, I'll answer it backwards. For me, and I don't mean to sound trite, this is the genuine, truthful answer. My favorite trick is whatever trick I'm working on. So I think that's really good for the creative process. You know, if I have dozens and dozens of original pieces that I perform, but they've all been performed thousands of times with translator to music, live, on a big stage, on a small stage. They've been developed and honed and polished. And by the time I perform them this week, it's the umpteenth thousandth time that I've done them. So I still derive joy from it. But to be honest with you, what I'm excited about are the ones that I'm working on and that aren't tested. So truly, my favorite tricks are whatever I'm working on now. So most recently, I have a trick that I've been doing for about 12 years, but I keep tweaking it and changing it. And it's called Cylinder and Coins. It's a version of a classic trick, but I do it in a totally different way. I was just in Bulgaria about 5 days ago, and I did it on their big nighttime James Corden type show. And it was a total thrill for me. And I was nervous, which is not something I experience that often because I'm always going on stage. But I was really nervous because I was doing a trick that, you know, I have done only a few times live in the last few years, and never live with all these additions. So that's the answer for me. In terms of tricks that other magicians do, there are so many. There's a trick that a guy named Tom Stone from Sweden does. Tom Stone is a really brilliant creator. He doesn't perform as much as he creates magic. And it's a 3-minute piece where a simple bowl that's shown empty, and a little red ball jump around. And it starts in a pretty standard way. Maybe if you were watching it, you'd even think to yourself, okay, I think I've seen something like this before. And you watch, and it gets a little more impressive. And now there are 2, and now there are 3, and the vanishes are getting better and better. And by the end of this 3 minutes, he turns the bowl upside down, and truly, red balls start coming out by the dozens and then by the hundreds. And the music has this big crescendo. And I organize events as well as perform on them. And I have flown this man all over the world, to London, to Columbus, Ohio, to New York, to Florida, all over the world in shows I've produced, and asked him to just do this 3 minutes, because that's how highly I think of it. It is like the instant standing ovation trick. Every time he's ever done it, people leap to their feet, and it gives me chills every time I see it.
That's great. Naomi Levine again. She wants to know, have tricks ever gone wrong, either on stage or on TV, and how did you cover?
Yeah, so I chronicle this in one of the chapters in my book. Um, we tend to think of magic tricks as binary. They either go right or they go wrong. But the truth is that a good magician will have a plan B, a plan C, D, E, F, G, so that what you see never looks like a mistake. I mean, if you see a magician go, well, that didn't work, you are seeing something really rare or a really, really bad magician, because we have ways to recover almost anything. But that's not to say things don't go wrong every night. Little things that I think not a single person except me would notice because I've seen my acts before. I had something go wrong on the Today Show one time with Kathy Lee. At the time was watching me, and you know, it's weird when you perform on TV because you work your whole life where you're the audience and I'm the magician, and then the first time you do TV, your hosts are back here with you, so you're doing this, you're doing like, hey, pick a card, but you know, it's a weird dynamic, and sometimes it took an adjustment period before I sort of mastered that in my head. And yeah, and right there on the Today Show, something went kind of sort of wrong, and you know, I learned from it and I recovered, and the trick went fine in the end. But I watched that clip and I just cringe.
Anything can happen live. What can you do? Do you have a preference for performing live on stage or in front of the cameras? And what was your experience performing for several U.S. presidents?
My preference is live, no question. And if ever I felt some affinity to the camera, I can tell you that after 2 years in a pandemic of doing virtual shows, I lost whatever that affinity was. I am really tired. I'm glad to be here. I'm absolutely ready to be touring again and ready to not be doing Zoom shows. I got to perform for President Clinton after he was in office for a Clinton Global Initiative event for his charity. And it was a poker tournament. And so they thought, probably on theme, that it would be cool if, as all these celebrities are paying for huge money, donating to the charity, that in the intermission, everybody could turn their chairs and watch my show. And it was great. And I got to perform for him privately, and then perform my show while he watched, and many other VIPs watched on. And it was one of the great thrills of my life. And then, of course, in the speech after, he's such a consummate pro, he thanks everybody involved in the event and made really lovely comments about my show and a little joke about it. And, you know, it's crazy to think that when you're in, you know, high school geometry class and the teacher is confiscating the cards beneath the desk that you're practicing with beneath the table, and you just think to yourself, this is an impediment to my future. Like, this playing cards aren't going anywhere. I got to pay attention to this math in school. And those playing cards take me to perform for the president was really surreal experience. I was also invited to perform at Obama's first inaugural ball in DC, and it was the Veterans Ball. So they have several balls, but one honors veterans, and I performed there. I didn't get to perform for Obama personally, but I got to perform for our Medal of Freedom winners and all sorts of our most decorated veterans. And Joe Biden was there, and that was just a huge honor, and he would later become president. So de facto, I guess I did.
Cool. What is your rehearsal? How much practice goes into an act? Do you review it? Do you watch yourself afterwards, or watch yourself on video? And are you your own toughest critic?
Yeah, I'd like to think so, although I've had some critics over the years. So I'm a pretty harsh critic, though. Sorry, that's New York City sounds in the background. I practice every day, but when you love what you do, when you have, I mean, I have a deck of cards within reach in every corner of my apartment. I'm always practicing. So when I'm on the road, like I have been the last 4 or 5 months, the practice becomes the shows themselves. You know, when I'm off the road, I have to keep sharp and practice here. But when you're performing every other day and you're warming up and you're doing lots of magic and lots of press for the shows themselves keep you in practice. So it works itself out. But truly, I come off tours 4 or 5 months of every day, a different city, a different plane. And the first night in bed, I'm still practicing with a deck of cards, working on the next new thing. And that's the definition of obsession, I guess.
I'm sure your audiences appreciated that. They understand when they watch you how much dedication you have for your art. One of our text questions, they'd like to know if you could share some thoughts on the amazing Jonathan who recently passed. The viewers saw him at the Comedy Castle in 2016 and really enjoyed him. And also, if you have any thoughts on Rudy Kobe, the world's coolest magician.
Sure. We're digging deep now. I like it. Yeah, so the amazing Jonathan just passed away, which is really sad. And actually, in particular, it's tragic because he battled addiction. You know, they made a couple of mainstream documentaries about this, and he was quite explicit in interviews for that he wasn't sure he could or wanted to come off of those substances and couldn't imagine life without it. And I guess in the end, it got him, which is tragic and sad. He was a revolutionary comedy magician, totally X-rated. His tricks didn't really work, so it's actually funny. You know, when I think of him, he loved magic, but I don't think of him as a magician because his tricks are going wrong. But he was a truly transformational comedian of the 90s. He was a comedy a lot when I was a kid, and he toured, and he had a Vegas show. So he was an irreverent classic, one of a kind, broke the mold when they made him, won't be another like him. Rudy Kobe was for many years my very favorite magician. If you asked 10-year-old me, who's your favorite magician, I would have said Rudy Kobe, the guy with 4 legs. He had the coolest show. He was like a comic book magician. And he actually had an actual comic book series about his life. And he would do these larger-than-life magic tricks, all totally, shockingly, strikingly original. And I just loved seeing him work. I wish he was still touring because he was fantastic.
Another question we have from Fred Levine. Fred would like to know if you've ever seen the female magician who by the time she finishes her act is totally nude. And do you think magic is conducive to shock?
No, I have not seen that. I don't know who that is. There have been lots of showgirls of magic type acts, but I haven't seen that. So that's a first for me. Yeah, I mean, shock plays a big role. I was interviewed by Larry Wilmore, who for a while hosted The Daily Show and who's a friend and who actually is a magician. Most people don't know that about him, but they know him for his comedy. He was a producer on The Office and shows like that. And he teaches screenwriting. And in the interview with me, he said a really brilliant thing that I've never forgotten, which is that shock is easy, justified surprise is hard. So in other words, if on stage I have a handkerchief and I go like this and I produce a bowling pin, that's easy, right? That's shock. You may not know how it's done, but you're going, I didn't really expect a bowling pin. What's going on here? But if instead I produce a lemon and I put it on the stage and then later in the show I borrow a dollar bill from you that you've written your name on, that dollar bill disappears. And then later still in the show I call your attention to the lemon and your dollar goes into the lemon. Well, that's still a surprise, but it's a justified surprise. And he's talking about this in terms of films, right? We all know a really unsatisfying ending. Somebody's hit by a car. Well, that's shock. But if the somebody that was driving the car ended up being the son of the guy who hit that was killed in the first part and solves the mystery and closes the circle, well, now that's a justified surprise. And so I'm always in search of justified surprise and trying not to do shock.
And we appreciate that. What is the most important or enjoyable takeaway from your latest book?
Well, if what you mean by takeaway is like reaction, you know, I got some advice from another great Jewish author who, if you guys are looking for speaker series, he has a new book out called The Baseball 100. It's Joe Posnanski. He's widely regarded as one of the great baseball scholars of our time. He wrote a Houdini biography, and I was a consultant for that book, and we became friends through our mutual love for sports. And I said to him, because he's written several best-selling books, when I got the deal for this, and then I actually had to make good on a promise and write it, I said, okay, what do I do? I've got a little bit of writer's block. I'm intimidated. I'm writing off in tangents that aren't going to end up in the book. And he said, here's my advice. And he received this advice as well. He said, distill down what your book is about in one sentence. And write that sentence down. Physically write it down on a Post-it note and tape that sentence to your monitor so that every page you write, every paragraph, every sentence you write, you're staring at that core value sentence in the face and you are asking whether it serves or deviates from that core value. And my core value that I eventually distilled this book down to was to elevate people's appreciation for magic. I feel like people who come to my show and other magic shows, they love magic, but they think of magic as a little diversion. A very common thing when I do shows is for people to go, oh, that was a really great show. I'm just so sorry my kids weren't here to see it. What about magic makes them think that it's fit for a 7-year-old, that they can't just say, I loved your show for me? What is it about after a show when people go, hey, that was a really great show? So tell me, are those like the same 20 or so tricks that everybody does, or are those original? You would never ask that question to Dave Chappelle after a comedy special. Is that your joke, or are you just doing the same jokes everybody else did, right? What an accidentally insulting thing to ask a performing artist. I realize that magic has a long way to go to being appreciated alongside the other performing arts. And so that's why I wrote this book. And so the best compliment that I get over and over on the road is that people say, hey, I read your book and I really appreciate what you magicians do now in a way that I didn't before. And that makes me feel very good.
Excellent. We've been provided with the name of the stripper magician. Apparently her name is Ursula Martinez.
That's a new one.
Learn something every day. So we have another question from H. Mark Candell, and he would like to know what comes first in your development of effects, the storyline, the magical effect, or the method searching for a premise?
That's a great question. Can you repeat it one more time?
Sure. What comes first, the storyline, the effect, or the method searching for a premise?
Right. Really wonderful question. Probably asked by somebody with an interest in magic, by judging by the lingo. I can tell you I almost never do the latter. So what he says when he says method-based magic is sometimes a magician will come up with a great move and go, okay, now what do I do with this? It makes a card turn over in the middle of the deck, but what do I do with it? Sometimes somebody will invent something or take a new technology and say, now I can weigh things that are lighter than a playing card, so I can tell things by the weight. What do I do with that? I've not had much success creatively creating that way. I tend to explain in my lectures and seminars for magicians that I am a collector of stories and a collector of trick plots. In other words, I'll think about great plots for a trick. I want to vanish a ring and make it appear on the stem of a wine glass. I do that in my show. Great, cool, visual, amazing. But in terms of the story, what I say, I'm just kind of storing away things that have happened to me, running into somebody on the other side of the world, how my parents met, it's a crazy story, doing magic for a blind person, a magician born without hands. All of these things, I just sort of store these stories, all of them true in my journals, in my notes. And then I'm always just hoping to pair the right story with the right trick and finding something that is better than the sum of its parts. Often I'll do a trick and I'll just realize yeah, it works, but I think it would work equally well without talking and telling that story. But once in a while, you elevate a magic piece by telling the story of how your parents met, and the deck is unshuffling itself as they get to the crescendo where they meet, and you realize that you're adding and enhancing something with the story.
Great. Another question from Naomi. What do your parents now think of your career in magic?
Um, I think they're really happy. I think that they're very proud. I've got the world's greatest mom, and she is beaming with pride. Probably annoying to listen to her talk about me constantly because I think she does to neighbors and friends, and I'm grateful for that. I'm not sure people around her are grateful to always be hearing stories about my travels and stuff, but I appreciate it. I think that nobody expected it. And my dad passed away in 2005, but my mom and stepdad are well in Ohio, northeastern Ohio, and I think they're beaming with pride. And I think the thing that matters to them is what would matter to any parent, and that is that, like, it's corny and trite to say, but I am doing something that I absolutely love. I wake up every single day super enthusiastic. You can imagine as we get to tour dates 39 and 40 next week of 45, right? 45 events talking about exactly what we're talking about. This book. This has been my sole focus since September 30th and the writing of it 4 years before that. I think I'd be justified in wanting to be done, wanting to talk about anything except magic in this book. And you know something? I love it. I'm genuinely enjoying being here and chatting with you and performing. I went to Virginia Beach a few days ago to do a book event. I was so excited to go. And it was 24 hours after getting home from Bulgaria, which was like a 36-hour ordeal with the connections and delays. But when you love what you do, the old expression, you never work a day in your life.
Very true. Another text, Gail Hines. What do you think about the extravagant tricks like making a plane disappear or the like?
It's a genre. It's not for me. I don't do that kind of magic. I think that kind of magic is getting scarcer and scarcer. The only place to see that kind of magic at the moment in the United States is Las Vegas. I tend to gravitate toward a more cerebral kind of magic. To me, if you can be close to somebody and give it meaning and give it a great story, whatever happens right there, 2 inches from your face, is as amazing as a helicopter 200 rows behind you. So that's my personal preference. But hey, I love it all, and there's art in all of it.
Great. Carol Weintraub-Fogel would like to know, would you comment about the kind of audiences who you think enjoy your performances the most and whom you prefer entertaining? Specific age or type of audience that you've entertained with in the past?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I'm not a children's magician. I don't love performing for kids. My show's not dirty. But children's magic, interestingly enough, is sort of its own planet. And I did a ton of children's magic when I was a kid. That's how I used to perform birthday parties only when I was growing up. But in the way that comedians have an expression that they say laughs per minute, the Seinfeld and all these people have talked about how many laughs per minute are they getting? How do they pack into their routine? If they're telling a story and the top part of the story is front loaded with exposition, they got to find jokes or beats or laughs or diversions to get the laughs per minute up. And in magic, of course, we look at it as impact of magic per minute. But for kids, you look at interactions per minute. So with kids, it's, where's the red handkerchief? Over here? No, over there. Should I put it here? Put it there, right? It's about interactions per minute. And it's just not my thing. There are children's magicians who do masterful work, but you can't do it all, and that's not my thing. I also don't like drunk audiences. There are people who crush for nightclubs or late shows at the Magic Castle when they're full of liquor. I have no interest in that whatsoever. I think that my goal is to tell stories with my magic and be cerebral and wake people up to some of the interesting things about our world through magic, and that all goes away when people are drunk. So my ideal audience is any adults who are focused and there to see great magic and are are responsive and excited. And fortunately for me, I've built a career where that's my audience most of the time.
Great. Someone noticed that, made a comment that many magicians have J in their name. Is there something special, or is it a coincidence about the name J?
I think that must be a total coincidence, but you're not wrong. I know a lot of J's as well. What's funny is Ricky Jay, who recently passed away, one of my all-time favorite magicians, was a notoriously cantankerous guy. And at one point, it got back to me when I was quite young that he was very distressed that an up-and-coming magician was capitalizing on his great name. And I only wish I could have been in the room when someone would have pointed out correctly that my birth name was Jay, Josh Jay. His birth name is Ricky Potash, which he changed for theatrical reasons to Jay. So if anybody should be changing their name from the original, it would have been him and not me. But hey.
Tell us about your designing illusions for stage and screen, and what it was like collaborating with HBO and Game of Thrones. What was that experience like?
Yeah, so I got a call. This was very early. Game of Thrones ran for, I think, 6, 7, 8 seasons, something like that. But very early, I think it was season 2, I was hired, and this is such a fun gig here in New York, not only to design the illusions, but to put everything together and be the magic talent for a commercial that ran for many months on TV and online. It was advertising the next season of Game of Thrones. And so I had to figure out, they were advertising, it was the first season that was going to be available on the iPad. So I had to figure out how to, they said, I mean, it's so crazy in these meetings when they say, so we'd like you to reach into the iPad and pull out a sword, and the sword should be on fire. And here I am, I'm taking notes like, okay, sword on fire from an iPad. And do you have an idea of how you're going to, oh no, we want you to figure that out. Okay. And we want you to be able to change one of the pins into another one of the pins that the characters were. Oh, okay. And again, do you have no, you're going to figure that out. Oh, okay. And so I had like 3 months to write these spots and figure out how to do it. And we did, and it was great. And it was really fun. And we filmed it all in a sound studio right here in Chelsea. And it was great to see myself on TV. And it was just from the neck down. So I wasn't actually performing there, but it was my hands and my torso. And it was really cool.
Cool story. Tell us about your consulting with the Postal Service on their stamp series Magic, and what was your involvement and how did that come about?
Yeah, there was a really cool stamp series. Let me see. I'm at my desk. I'm never at my desk. Do we have any here? Let me see. No, probably not. Okay. There's a stamp series. You can look it up online called Magic, and it celebrates and embraces the art of magic on a postage series. And they hired me to describe all the things that they had the artists depict. So Vanishing Birdcage is a classic trick that goes back a little more than 100 years and has some symbolism behind it. And they had a magician in a turban, and I talked about mentalism and the history of that. And so I described all of those things, and I made suggestions for the art itself. And then they had me help design some magic tricks that you could do with those postage stamps that they used for the unveiling ceremony when they did it. But it was a huge honor because, I collected stamps as a kid, and the U.S. Postal Service is one of our government institutions. And of all the people they asked, I was honored to be asked.
Great honor. One of our viewers would like to know, is there a way to see the Game of Thrones commercial? Is it on YouTube or available somewhere?
No, it is not, much to my chagrin. And one of the things that's sad about that is I went back and asked the director, I said, hey, it was years later, and I know the commercial's not in circulation anymore. Can I have a copy for my personal files? I'd love to post it on YouTube or something. And that was a big, thanks for asking, but no, you may not. HBO owns that footage. I cannot send it to you. I can't send it to you watermarked. That is a no-go. So I don't even have record of that footage. Although the director and director of photography both came to my show in New York one night, unannounced. I had a show that ran for 2 years in New York called Six Impossible Things. And they came back and we reminisced about it. Another funny thing that we reminisced about was we shot the whole thing. I thought it looked great. It was amazing. It had some post-production. I don't hide the fact that there was some camera tricks in it. And it got to the powers that be, and they said, yep, it's great, except we don't like the color of his shirt. And wardrobe had picked out the shirt. It wasn't me. It was like in a blue shirt. So we have to do it all again. And I was like, when I got that call, it was crazy to me. I mean, this thing with like 30-some people on the set, buffet lunches. It was like 4 days long, hair and makeup. And they do this whole thing. And then somebody in an office somewhere said, I think we want to go with a white shirt instead of a light blue shirt. And we do it all again. We're all paid completely over again. Same thing. I couldn't believe it, but that's the world of TV, right?
That's right. You travel, you perform extensively. What are you enjoying the most about your life? And is there anything you find less than enjoyable?
Wow, that's a deep question. I'm very happy. I feel very lucky. I feel like I get to do what I love every day. No, there's nothing, I mean, I would feel very petty complaining about travel, right? Travel's a pain in the neck sometimes, but travel's also a great joy. I like being here in New York. I would say that my time in New York is like slowly drawing to a close. I'm starting to look perhaps at somewhere else where I can have a little more space and spread out and better weather. But no, the short answer is I'm a very happy person. I love what I do. There's not much. Just the business aspects, of course, are not fun, but I get to do more performing than business stuff.
Great. Do you have any advice you would give to a young magician?
The only sort of, I mentor a lot of young magicians, and so we get much deeper than just quick advice, little bite-sized bits of wisdom, because the really great insights happen when you listen and watch a young performer or something. But my sort of blanket advice to anybody young is twofold. One is that I think you have to make sure you're passionate about it. A lot of kids get into magic because they went to a magic camp and instead of horseback riding, they're into magic this summer. But by next summer, they'll be into collecting baseball cards, and the summer after that, they'll be into building rockets, and the summer after that, they'll be playing football. That's totally fine, but the only magicians who really persevere and become great are the ones that are wildly passionate about it, the ones that can't not do magic. So I'm very frank with kids, do you love it? Or do you just think this is something that might be a hobby for a few years? It's fine if that's the answer, but we're here for the people who are wildly passionate about magic. And then the other piece of advice is on my website, I have a free ebook called Under Over for all young magicians. And I put all the best advice I could think of in that ebook. And I hope young magicians will check it out.
I'm sure they will. I guess we have another deep philosophical question here. A viewer would like to know, what is magic? And what does magic teach us about how we think?
Those are deep philosophical questions. They sound like good ones maybe to end on as our time draws to a close. I can't answer what magic is, because the fundamental thing about magic is that it isn't real, right? And that's not a disenchanting thing to say. That's a marvelous thing to say, because what I do is create the illusion of something that and my audiences know, and I know that is not real. So what we're doing is make believe. So if magic isn't real, magic is very hard to define. So that's as much as I can say about that. And then the second question that you asked is about how magicians think. And, I want you to discover this with the book. Listen, I haven't said much about the book specifically, but this is the book. It's called How Magicians Think. And I really do hope you will check it out. I'm very proud of it. And it would mean a great deal to me if you bought it for somebody who loves magic, or for yourself. If you just want great stories, it's a very palatable read, and I hope you'll enjoy it. But what it all comes down to is that how magicians think is really a question of how their audiences think. Magic is all about empathy. So what I'm thinking about at all times when I'm designing a magic trick is, If I do this, what is the audience thinking? If I have them look here, where do they look next? If I did this trick, what would they think about it and what would their reaction be? So in truth, thinking like a magician is learning to think like your audience. And that is a great lesson no matter what you do. It's the ultimate lesson for public speaking. It's the ultimate lesson for creating artwork that your audience will enjoy. It's the lesson when you're teaching, is to try and get into the heads of your audience and understand their thought process.
Great. Appreciate it. And we thank you so much for spending the time with us. I think we're going to go back to Brenda for some final comments. And again, thank you so much, Josh J., for being such a wonderful part of our evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh and Stephen, for being with us and for such a fascinating discussion. And thanks to all of you at home for joining us tonight. Our next event is celebrating Women's History Month, When Women Invented Television, by author Jennifer Keeshan Armstrong. And she will be joined in conversation with Catherine Kangany, Executive Director of the Detroit Jewish Historical Society of Michigan. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit our website for our full schedule, ways to get involved, and to buy Joshua's book. See you next time.